Say hello, I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. No, it's not Rebellion Radio. I'm not quite there yet, but uh, look, we do this show to demonstrate resistance to, to so many things, and of course, we live in a time now where, with the current president and the current demeanor of the half of the country, at least one, the other main political party, has just embraced almost everything that that the United States claims it doesn't stand for, and everything from free speech to you know their um, the racism that is demonstrated on a daily basis in everything from immigration to to any number of policies. It's really quite remarkable, and it's not even just racism; it's classism. I mean, it's what this country is doing to its poor, at just to benefit the rich, is really just an incredible. It's an incredible state of affairs. Let's just put it that way. Now, of course, I as much as I hate always talking about Donald Trump, he made the news again on two separate issues. Well, not separate issues, but two areas of the same issue. On when it comes to mascots, for those who don't know, he is trying to force the Washington football team and the Cleveland baseball team to go back to its racist mascots. And when I say racist mascots, let me be clear. The Washington football team used a racial slur for its name. Now, the Cleveland baseball team used a misnomer in calling themselves the Indians. But what made their mascot so racist was the buffoonish character that they used for their logo. And that's why those two teams were targeted so heavily by Native people to eradicate those mascots. And it's not that suggesting that the Atlanta baseball team or the Kansas City football team or the Chicago hockey team that were okay with those. We're not. And I gave an interview on a news channel this week where that was asked. Well, how come you guys are just picking on Washington and Cleveland? I said, nah, we're not. And in fact, we've been very, very strongly opposed to, especially the popularity of the Kansas City football team. But for those who don't know, Trump is trying to specifically force Washington by claiming that he's going to kill their stadium deal. For those who aren't that familiar, and frankly, I can understand those who are not following sports these days. The Washington football team hasn't been playing in Washington, D.C., the city proper, for a number of years. They used to play at a stadium called the RFK Stadium. And that has kind of gone into, it's kind of a dilapidated stadium. So they've been playing out in Maryland. And the Congress, who controlled the property that RFK Stadium was located on, has transferred control of that property to the city. And they did it last year before Trump was sworn in. So that's a done deal. But Trump is now saying that he's going to kill that deal. He'll stop them from getting the stadium deal in Washington, D.C. if they don't change the name. Now, there's a couple of things going on here. First off, I mean, I don't know if there's ever been such a petty and, trivial person in the White House as there is today. And I say that without fully dismissing the whole idea that much of the stuff that he does is a distraction from his terrible policies, like the bill, his big, beautiful bill, or how he's trying to deflect the fact that he's all over the Epstein files because Jeffrey Epstein, his pedophile friend, was a dear friend of his. So he's trying to distance himself from those things by throwing other stuff out there, and the mascot issue is one of them. But what he's trying to do in Washington is problematic on a number of levels. For one thing, the president of the United States does not control what happens in the city of Washington, D.C. He's not the mayor of the city of Washington, D.C. He's not the president of the city of Washington, D.C. He's not on the city council, none of those things. He is the president of the United States, and his job is not supposed to be involved in stadium development or the names of sports teams. That's not his job. And the fact that he is doing this stuff is, like I said, it's either a distraction or just more evidence of just the ludicrous nature of his pettiness. The irony is that he hates the name Commanders, and yet it's kind of what he is. I mean, he's the commander in chief. I mean, he is a commander and he hates the name, which, I don't know what that really says about him. But, and look, I know a lot of people are not crazy about the fact that the Washington changed its name to the Commanders. And I don't really care one way or the other. I just wanted them to change it from the racial slur that they had. So that's one thing. The other thing is again, where is his legal authority? And here's where I got to beat up on the media. The media really does suck. I mean, they really are terrible. I mean, look, not only do you have the whole Paramount selling out, CBS selling out to Trump over a lawsuit, which was ridiculous, and then selling out to Trump, because of the merger they plan to be, courting at this point, getting rid of Stephen Colbert and the late night show. I mean, it's the whole media in general, but news in particular has just gotten to just the worst place that most of us ever seen. And look, I'm not suggesting that the news hasn't always been biased. It's always been pro-American, hup America, American exceptionalism, all that stuff. But now there's a fear that exists in the media, a fear of Trump. And whether Trump has the power to kill shows, television shows, or whether these networks and these media executives are just so gutless and so afraid of getting in Trump's way that they do things without being forced to do it. So, and when I talk about the news, here's what I'm talking about. This whole thing with Trump and the Washington football team and threatening to kill the RFK Stadium deal has been reported on, but not one media outlet, not even NPR, because they're gutless too. I mean, let's be clear, they're gutless too. Not even NPR would come right out and say Trump has no legal authority to interfere with the stadium project. They mentioned that the stadium property was transferred to the city last year, but then stopped right there. They never challenged, Trump's authority. They've never even offered any suggestion that his involvement in the mascot names or the nicknames of sports teams is inappropriate. They just carry on as if this is part of his job or something like that. And I'll tell you that it's just pathetic. I will say I'm glad to see so many Native organizations, whether it's the individual specific nations or some of the activist community, or even some of the organizations like NCAI and others. I was glad to see more voices come out and condemn what the president was trying to do with Washington. But like I said, that's not his only deal. Here's the other thing. As many of you know, he did weigh in on New York State's ban on the use of Native mascots by public schools. And he did so at the behest of Massapequa, which is a very, very white, very, very right-wing community in Long Island. Look, New York may be a blue state, but it's got some red pockets, and that's one of them. And they begged Trump to intervene on the state pushing them to change their mascot. They're essentially the last school resisting this thing. And they did. I mean, Trump sent out Linda McMahon, his education secretary, which is absurd all by itself since she's killing the whole agency anyway, and sent her out. And here's the ludicrous part about Trump's position on Massapequa. What he was trying to say is what the state has done with this ban is violating the civil rights of Native Americans. Yeah, you heard me. We asked for this. No, we demanded this. We've demanded it. We demanded that Washington change its name, Cleveland change its name, the others professional sports, and we've been pressuring New York State and every school in New York State with a Native mascot. We've been knocking them off one at a time, one school at a time, getting the change. Well, I finally changed strategy, and it turns out my strategy was lining up with the Commissioner of Education strategy to say, look, if we can make an example of one school, we can actually push this ban all the way through. And that's what Dr. Rosa did. She actually followed my lead on going after Cambridge, my alma mater, my high school, pushed that issue up to the education department, and when she ruled against Cambridge, she took the next step and issued the ban against all schools. All schools are banned from having a native mascot unless they can get permission or work something out with an affected native peoples or native population, a nation, a recognized state or federally recognized nation in New York. Only one school's done that, and that's out this way, Salamanca, which is located on the Seneca territory of Allegheny. It's not adjacent, it's on it. And that's the only school that was given permission by the Seneca Nation to keep their Warriors mascot. Now, I'm not crazy about that either, but that's the only one. One other school I think got a little bit of. There was a school up near Mohawk territory where they used to be called the Red Raiders, and they used to have a native mascot associated with that years ago. But they changed it several years ago, dropped Red, kept Raiders, and now they use some sort of knight or something like that. I don't know. And the St. Regis Mohawk Tribal Council gave them permission to keep it as long as they kept it as far away from any native representation as possible. So those are the only two exceptions. But Massapequa asked for Donald Trump to get involved. He got involved. He's actually tried to get his education department to get the Justice Department to file a civil rights complaint in federal court claiming that the ban is a violation of the Civil Rights Act. And of course, that is an absolutely absurd assessment of the situation. I mean, the fact that he's claiming that that Native people are being discriminated against, that we're somehow being erased because white people can't mock us. I mean, you can't be any stupider than that to make that claim. But that's what Donald Trump is. He is an ignorant fool. And I don't care how many people have voted for him, because you're fools too if you did. And if it sounds like I'm coming across too strongly on this thing, sorry. No, I'm not sorry. This is just a matter of fact. Native people have been trying to fight this mascot issue for over 50 years. Over 50 years. New York State told schools over 20 years ago to get rid of the mascots and do it in a time that was appropriate for them, so it wouldn't cost them money. So when I hear schools like Connecticut or Massapequa saying, well, it's going to cost us tens of millions of dollars to get rid of our mascot. Well, for one thing, why do you have tens of millions of dollars invested in a mascot in the first place? Any mascot. I don't care if you were the Massapequa Ostriches. Why would you have tens of millions of dollars invested in that kind of marketing, scam? Why? I mean, why would you do that? I mean, there are things like education you should be spending money on, not marketing your sports logos. So, I mean, that's just plain absurd. And you had 20 years to phase it out where it would have cost you a dime. That's the matter of fact. That's just a matter of fact. And when Dr. Rosa finally said, look, you've had plenty of time. We told you, and we've told you repeatedly. The New York State Education Department never wavered on its position on mascots. You know who else never did? The U.S. Commission on Human Rights, on Civil Rights, I should say. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights has always taken a position against this thing. In fact, it was their position against the mascots in 2001 that prompted the state education commissioner at the time, Dr. Richard Mills, to issue his advisory to get rid of the mascots. It was based on the federal the U.S. Commission, the National Commission on Civil Rights. I mean, so for Trump to suggest that this is a civil rights violation and be completely unaware that the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights has repeatedly stood against the mascot issue, I'm sorry, that's just ignorance. That's just stupidity. And he's not the only ignorant guy here. Linda McMahon, she's just as much of a moron as he is. How do you not know this? I mean, look, I understand why I know it. because this is kind of what I do. But so the latest thing is that Massapequa is asking Donald Trump. In fact, they even drafted one up and they had it published in the New York Post. They're asking Trump to issue an executive order prohibiting the ban. Yeah, they're asking Donald Trump to issue a presidential executive order, not only granting Massapequa permission to keep its mascot, well, I think they're the Chiefs or something like that. I don't know, but essentially to condemn the state's ban across the board. That's what Massapequa is asking. Now, here's a couple of things. I just got to say this. Trump has no legal authority to intervene on state education policy. And of course, he's actually said this repeatedly over the years that, some of these things should all be done at the state level. He says it about abortion. He said it about education. It should all be handled at the state level. And until now. Now he's trying to weigh in as the commander in chief to take a position against prohibiting native mascots. And of course, it is just an absurd position for him to take. It's an absurd issue for him to take up. And the fact of the matter is, New York State would not comply with this executive order. They won't. I mean, for one thing, the ban has withstood legal challenges. Richard Mills' advisory, his memo, his call to end mascots, that was challenged legally too. And it withstood all legal scrutiny back 20 years ago. When Dr. Rosa told my alma mater, Cambridge Central School, you have to get rid of your mascot. I'm ordering you to get rid of your mascot. That withstood challenges too. The courts ruled in her favor. And when she issued the ban and 4 schools down on Long Island challenged it, the court stood behind the ban again. So this isn't just some obscure policy, being thrown out there by a couple of elite liberals, within education. No, this has been well thought out. It was voted for unanimously by the New York State Board of Regents, by the way. It has been almost unanimously supported across Native territories from every organization, every child development expert, every psychological expert or association. They've all called for this. And of course, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. In fact, they did it repeatedly. The last time they actually weighed in, at least that I've been able to find online, was when they were commending Washington for dropping its native mascot. It was acknowledging what Washington did, and then it once again reaffirmed its position on the use of native people for mascots, our culture, our images, all of it. So it could not be more clear where the trend is going either. I mean, I think there's like 8, 9, maybe 10 states that have issued bans, whether they were done by agencies or done by their state legislatures. There are look, the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, they condemned it, 15 or 20 years ago. They banned it then. So if Trump is going to suggest that the New York State ban is a violation of civil rights, is he going to go after all the other states? Is he going to go after the NCAA? Because all those schools have changed. The only name that remains is the Florida State Seminoles, because apparently they worked out some deal with the Seminoles in Florida. Not the larger group of Seminoles in Oklahoma. They hate the Florida State Seminole mascot issue. The idea of putting some white boy on a horse going out there to throw a spear into the football field is it's not just mockery, it's absurdity. For those who don't know, what the Seminoles were famous for were being a nation that lived in the swamps, in the Everglades. They were not plains horsemen. So I'm not saying there aren't horseback riders in Seminole country. I'm not saying that. But the idea of putting a white boy on a horse made up to look like Chief Osceola, or claiming to be Chief Osceola, to be a spear chucker into a football field on horseback, again, you can't make up this kind of level of absurdity. This is what white people do. They take something, they manipulate it to suit them and to suit their ideas and their ideals, and they just mock. They just mock away. And so my question is, when Trump is suggesting that these racist names and mascots need to come back, what's his position on blackface? What's his position on the N word? We know how he feels about the R word. He thinks that's absolutely appropriate. And he says, well, Native people love that. They love that name. Well, look, I know there's some black people who use the N word not only in their day-to-day conversation, but obviously it's been featured in film and music and everything else. But that doesn't mean that white people can use it. I'm sorry. That doesn't mean white folks are welcome to start spouting it off. In fact, Reggie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't say that word on the radio. I don't know if you're there, Reg, but
Yeah, I'm here, John. No, you can't.
and I know part of that is probably WBAI policy. I don't know if the FCC specifically has banned that
Here's the
word.
crazy thing, John. The FCC has an issue of they don't really have an issue about how should I call this slurs, but they do have an issue about general profanity, the F bomb and and all of its cousins and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's more of a Pacifica policy more than
And
anything else.
it's more broad than specific, because I tell you, I was on other radio stations and I used the word only in the description of this issue. I didn't call anybody that. I wasn't referring to anybody
Yeah, of
as the N
course.
word. But any mention of that word within many radio, the standards of many radio stations, it got me a warning. And I think I got a warning even from WBAI for saying it once. I realized it's not the 7 dirty words of George Carlin, but apparently it's the eighth one. So, I mean, but the fact that we can still, and look, even when people called me up about this Washington football team thing, the interviewers had no problem just spouting off the R word. They just said it. And, they don't even hedge. You know what I'm saying? It has become it was such a common usage to refer to us as that word, even though it's got a terrible history. It's associated with everything from the taking of scalps for bounties to, but I mean, really just even the N word is the idea of reducing somebody down to the color of their skin in such a way that you use a derogatory word for it. And that's what the R word was. And so even though it's an absolutely comparable analogy to make between the R word and the N word, we can say the R word on this radio station. I can whistle songs about it. I could call this radio show. I could call it Redskin Radio, and everybody would be fine with it. You know what I'm saying? And I'm sorry, Reggie. That's just wrong. That is just freaking wrong. And
It is wrong. It's absolutely wrong. I find it. I mean, in so many, but this is something that you have been saying for a long time, John, on this show and in private when we talk. This is just the natural hypocrisy of the ethics of this country, and it always has been.
well, and I always mention this, and I'm not trying to do oppression Olympics here, but there's a unique racism that
I
Native
know you're
people
not.
that Native people experience, and this is it. This is among. It's not the only place. I always talk about these legal doctrines were geared specifically towards Native people. There's a lot of specific policies and practices, not just by government, but by the general public. And the mascot issue is one of them. I always ask the same question, and I shut down the conversation when I do. I said, if you're claiming that the mascot issue is all about honoring us, I ask one simple question: how would you honor black people with a mascot? And I realize that's a really complicated question, right? Because what word would you use, right? What would be the name of your team, and what would your logo be? But even if you got over that, even if you found, which you can't, because there's no appropriate word that you could use for a mascot for black people. And you know what? There's no appropriate word you can use for a mascot for Native people either. But you couldn't. But even if you got over that, even if you found some symbol that somehow could be interpreted as benign or honorable enough for your logo, how would black people feel about white folks dressing up as black people because that's their mascot? I mean, how would they feel about wearing blackface to a football game because your mascot is honoring black people? That's what Native people experience. Every Sunday, we watch this crap on television. We watch this crap on television for baseball, for hockey. Look, I always bring this one guy up who's famous from Philadelphia. Of course, Philadelphia has always got the wildest fan base, right? That's what they say. Well, there's this one fan who used to go to the Philadelphia Eagles games when they were playing the Washington football team, and he would bring a duffel bag in, allowed to bring a duffel bag in, I might add. And in that duffel bag, he had a rubber head made up to look like a Native person. Put feather headdress on it, put war paint on it, wrote in black marker across the forehead of that where it said Redskin, Deadskin. He impaled that head with a sword, a plastic sword, of course, and he would hold it up during the football game, and people would cheer it. The fans would cheer this guy. Of course, he'd be in green face and the whole bit for his Philadelphia Eagles, but he'd be hoisting up this impaled Indian head to the cheers and delight of Philadelphia fans. And I say, what happens if I have my 7-year-old grandchild with me when I'm at that game? What do I say to him? And you know what? Just in case people are wondering, well, that's football, that's the way it is. When Philadelphia Flyers were playing the Chicago Blackhawks in the Stanley Cup, the guy shows up in orange paint this time with the same thing. Only this time it says Red Hawks, Dead Hawks across the Indians' face. And he hoists up that impale. And you know what? Not only does it get the cheers from the crowd, but the network that was carrying the game, broadcasting the game, they used him in the cutaway imagery when they put the score up, and you know how they always have the fans in the background. They had him in the background. When they were cutting away to commercial to put the score up. So they zeroed in on him on television, so everybody could see this Philadelphia fan with the impaled Indian head at a Stanley Cup playoff game. And look, you can say all you want about how, well, yeah, but we don't do that. I know, but if you're allowing Native people to be used for mascots, that's what happens with the opposing fan. We had people showing up in fact, the University of Colorado, I think they were the Cowboys or something like that. They were playing against Florida State, and they pulled out a banner on the side of at the game, said, "Get ready for another trail of tears." All right. So if you were playing a team that had a lot of kids on that team, or even if it was a professional team that had a lot of Jewish people on the team, could you say, "Get ready for another train to Auschwitz"? Of course you couldn't. But you can do this. And it wasn't just this one college game. And they featured it on College Game Day, by the way. I mean, it was broadcast across the entire country. But high school games, I've seen two different distinct occasions where high schools had created the banner. In fact, one of them was a paper banner, and they ran their team through the paper banner. It said, "Get ready for another trail of tears," as their team came through because they were playing against the quote unquote Indians or some school with that logo. And we have seen it. We have seen it, all kinds of posters and and flyers put out where a team that was competing against a team with a Native mascot used the most racist and violent, scalping, blood pouring out, the whole bit, imagery. And we're just supposed to be okay with it. It's supposed to be okay. And that's okay for high school. And nobody's correcting the narrative. It's not like these kids are being taught anything. Nobody's saying, there's an inappropriateness not only about that when our opponents do this, but there's actually inappropriate about us using Native people for mascots. No. And for those of us who have advocated for this ban and to eliminate these things, we never get a chance to speak to students. We're actually almost prohibited. And and that's sad because I think those kids deserve an education. They deserve to know why this is wrong. And of course, like I said, you only have to acknowledge that nobody else is used in this way, especially in this broad. I mean, I know people say, well, what about the Fighting Irish? Well, let's be clear. Notre Dame was a Catholic institution, and many of those Catholics were Irish, especially the priests and such. So when they decided to make fun of themselves, that's a little different than somebody who is not Irish trying to do something to cast the Irish as violent or whatever else. I don't know. But and look, the other thing that we hear all the time is, look, we don't mean to be insulting. We're not trying. I mean, look, we are proud to call ourselves Indians. We're not being derogatory. And I have to go back to the same thing. You simply don't understand the words coming out of my mouth. It isn't necessarily that there are words, racial slurs like what Washington used, or buffoonish imagery that like Cleveland has used or other teams have used. It's the idea that you are not only dehumanizing us, but you are casting us as these images that are never really accurate. They're always Hollywood stereotypical kind of images or conduct or dance or whatever. You pick that up, and that's what you're representing as your institution of education as to what Native people are. That's what we are. We're not grandparents. We're not educators. We're not intelligent human beings. We're just vicious, warlike savages. Granted, sometimes you throw the word noble in front of that, so I'm supposed to be not just a merciless Indian savage. I'm a noble savage. No, I'm not. I'll describe savagery for you. You can see it happening in Israel right now, or in Gaza, I should say. What the United States and Israel are doing to that decimated population, that's savagery. What you're seeing happen to immigrant populations in this country, that is savagery. And you know who else is getting caught up into that, by the way? Native people. Why? Because we're a little brown. I don't know if you notice this, but if you stand the average Native person next to the average Mexican, there's not a whole lot of difference in the appearance. You know what I'm saying? So yes, Native people are getting swept up. And you know what this results in? And this just makes me even madder because I've watched a bunch of videos and I hear people saying, well, I'm Native and I got stopped by ICE and I got questioned and I told them that I was Native and they didn't care. So now I'm going to go get a U.S. passport. So you're going to allow the Trump administration with their fraudulent, illegal immigration policy to further push you into assimilation into American culture. You're going to not only plead your case as an American, but you're going to get the most distinctive identifier you could get, a U.S. passport, to show that you're what? Not because you're still brown, folks. You're still brown, but you're not that brown. That's what you're doing. I would rather show my relationship to those people who are being deported, not my distinction from them. You know why? Because they're indigenous people too. So shame on every Native person who believes that they've got to go out and get a U.S. passport or carry some sort of U.S. citizenship document with them because they're afraid of getting caught up in an ICE raid. You know what? I wish they'd come pick me up. I would sue the crap out of so many people involved in that policy. And you know what? That's what these nations should be lining up to do. They should be lining up their legal counsel. They should be lining up every Native media outlet they can connect to, because you can't count on the non-Native media. You can't really count on the Native media either. But we should be blasting this. We should be making noise over this, not just to say, "Well, I'm an American too." You made me an American in 1924. Oh, the hell you did. So, yeah, that's just another one of the things that I can manage to get angry over. So, but no, I guarantee if they pick me up, because here's the thing that I came to realize. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when I was talking about the fact that I can't fly right now. If I don't accept U.S. citizenship, technically, that makes me an undocumented immigrant the moment I step off of native lands. I mean, think about that. Think about the absurdity of that. That because I may reject U.S. citizenship, that I would technically be an undocumented immigrant if I leave native territory. So if I step off the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation into the rest of Erie County or Cattaraugus County, yeah, there's a county called Cattaraugus, or any of the surrounding counties. If I step into those counties, if I go to New York City, I'm walking the streets of New York City as an undocumented immigrant. Am I an immigrant? No, but technically, that's what I would be considered. That you can't make anything more absurd than this up. I mean, this is the world that we live in today. And you know what? Too many of you, I've talked to people, and I've talked to even native people. I've had native people just recently, somebody say, well, I do agree with Trump's immigration policy. Really? Do you? Really? I've literally had native people say to me, well, that's the one area that I agree with Trump. I said, well, why is that? Because they work? Yeah, but they work for less. And that's because they want to make less money? I mean, again, how do people live with themselves when they understand how preposterous this is? And the idea that native people are only outraged if they happen to be swept up with other brown people? That's what makes you mad because you are native and they are what? They're just as indigenous to most of this land as you are. Maybe even more so. Just because they speak Spanish, you're speaking English, for crying out loud. That's not your native tongue. For those who don't know history, Mexican territory went clear all the way up to most of California before the United States claimed
up to Colorado. Don't forget
yeah,
that.
Colorado. It went all the way up. So anybody who says, well, you're from south of the border. No, the border crossed me. I didn't cross the border. And you know what? Those migratory patterns of native peoples that used to come from the northern, what is considered Canada, down to Mexico, those migratory patterns are tens of thousands of years old. Not hundreds of years old, not decades old, thousands of years old. So I'm sorry. Shame on any of you native people who think the immigration policy is fine as long as it doesn't affect you. That's just wrong. That's just wrong. And I can't tell you how strongly I feel about that. Because a friend of mine just sent me a video and he said, well, you haven't really talked about this issue that much. Well, because I have a different take on it. Look, this isn't about being anti-American. It's about not being an American. And there's nothing wrong with not being American. Look, I get it. A whole lot of people believe that this land is the land of milk and honey. Why would they believe that? Because they know how much this country has exploited every other country around the world, stealing their resources, exploiting their cheap labor. And so they come here and they still get their labor exploited. Documented or undocumented. Trust me, the documented immigrants aren't making a whole lot more money than the undocumented immigrants. They just have the undocumented just have no recourse. That's all. And when Trump started deporting all of these hotel workers and migrant farmers and that kind of stuff, his corporate overlord said, "Hey, wait a second here. You're starting to affect my business here. Those people work for me, and they work cheap. You're taking away my cheap labor, and it's not unskilled labor. These guys are better at what they do than anybody we've ever had." So when you're eating your salad next time, or your fruit, or the meat that comes from the meat packing or the meat processing facilities that are filled with migrant workers, documented and otherwise. When you check into your hotel or you eat in a restaurant, know that there are people who are doing work that you think is beneath you and others think are beneath them. They are taking American jobs. They're filling jobs that Americans are just too lazy or unwilling to do. And that's the fact. Those are the facts. And in fact, they are so evident that, again, Trump's own corporate overlords made him back off on his policy a little bit. So he had to stop talking a little bit about ICE, and he had to change the subject to something else. So what could you talk about that isn't going to affect a big population? Native mascots. Native people are the smallest, most marginalized people within the continent. So who cares what they think? We should be able to mock them. In fact, one of the things that Trump said when he was talking about this whole Washington football thing, he referred to us here as our American Indians. I got news for you, Trump. We aren't yours. We are not yours. We are not your mascots. We are not your Indians. We are not your Native Americans. We predate your existence. And we do so with dignity to this day. So while you're trying to encourage racial slurs to become commonplace, but only for the most marginalized people, know that we're going to fight you on this thing. And we're going to continue to fight you. The final thing that I'll say about Massapequa's desire, and they even drafted the executive order they wanted Trump to sign. Not only will it not have any legally binding force, but Trump's not going to be around forever. The guy probably isn't even going to live out his term. I don't know if you've seen him lately, but he's got bigger ankles than.
So you heard about the bloated legs, right?
I heard about it. It was so obvious that you just watch the way he walks and everything else. But yeah, this is a guy he's got some. So they can blow it off as well. It's just it's just swollen legs. Yeah, it's just swollen legs. No, he's probably got some sort of liver stuff going on, or the potential for blood clotting or whatever else. He's got some other thrombosis going on or something like that. He's got some stuff going on. This is not a healthy guy. So he probably won't even live out his term. But even if he does, he's done after that. People could talk about trying to extend and make him run again, and it ain't going to happen. And you know what? If J.D. Vance or, one of these other, Rubio or one of these other Trump clowns get in after him, then I'll say, as I said this time, you got what you paid for. And we're going to continue to fight. We're always going to fight. I mean, this show's called Resistance Radio for a reason. And I'm not one of those people who tout this notion that our existence is our resistance. No. I'm not merely demonstrating resistance by breathing the same air as you. I'm coming after these issues. That's why we have a New York State ban on the use of mascots today, because I went after the issue. I did. I didn't wait. I didn't wait for, to get tens of thousands of people behind me. I went after it myself. And why was I successful? Because I'm right. And I'm not saying righteousness always prevails. It certainly doesn't. But if you make the right argument to the right people, which is what I did by going after the New York State Education Department, they were the right people. They aren't politicians. Their jobs are education. Their constituency isn't you and I, it's children. Those were the right people for me to take this right issue to. Not right, left, right, wrong. That's why we have the ban today. And that ban is going to stay. I don't care what Donald Trump does. I don't care what these fraudulent people who claim to be native, calling themselves guardians. I got to bring it up again. How absurd is it, Reggie, that Trump opposes the name Commanders when he is one, and the Native American Guardians Association opposes the name Guardians when that's their name. I mean, again, you can't make up the hypocrisy that these guys carry with them on a daily basis.
I know I'm going to overthink this, but I'm going to continue to I'm going to continue to say this, and hear me out. Could it be possible? And I know it sounds outlandish.
I know where you're going. I know where you're going. Please do keep going.
Could this be possibly and some kind of internal fight in Trump's mind, saying that he despises the word commanders because he has yet to become one properly?
Or because he insists he is one and he should be the only one and nobody should share in that moniker but him.
Okay, we're in the same.
Yeah, we're in the same.
We're in the same range. We're in the same range. All right, fair enough. All right, because I wasn't too sure whether you was gonna you hear me say, Reggie, I think you're thinking this a little too hard, but I'm glad you said what you said.
I'm not saying Commanders is a great name for a football team.
No.
I don't think Chiefs are either, because here's the thing. Hear me out on this one. If you were calling yourself the Commandos, that's a group of people, but you don't have a group of commanders. In fact, Trump would argue he's the only one. You have one commander, and then you have those who are commanded. You don't have chiefs. I mean, you have a chief, or you have maybe a couple, but you don't have 11 chiefs on a football field fighting to move the pigskin. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, yeah. So I think there's mistakes in trying to use these more singular type leadership names for the name of your team. I mean, but if you were using a broader name, Vikings, yeah, that's a population of people. That's not a specific singular title amongst a group of people. So I think there's a mistake in that. Now, look, I don't care if Washington calls themselves the Commanders or not. The name doesn't bother me. Do I think it was the greatest name they could have picked? Probably not. But I just wanted one to go away. I didn't care which one came in. That was my bottom line. And I'm going to tell you, we are coming after Atlanta, we are coming after Kansas City, and we are coming after Chicago. We're not done yet. And you know what? State by state, Pennsylvania, I'm coming after you. I'm coming after you, Pennsylvania, because I already got my job done here in New York. Yeah, we still got a couple of holdouts, but we got the deed done here. Coming after you in Pennsylvania. I guess we got to go after Jersey. We got to go after a couple of these other states that are still. I think Illinois is considering changing it. I think they have a bill in their legislature, but it didn't advance this last cycle. For apparently somebody opposed it, but. Well, look, we're coming after you. Every state that has them. I realize it's going to be a little bit more difficult as we get into the southern states, because they're southern states, but we're coming after you, and we're not done until it's all done. I don't expect to see a nationwide ban, because look, even when we've had supposedly progressive people in the White House, Obama never got his education department to barely speak on the issue. And when he was asked, by the way, about the Washington football team, and I'm going to paraphrase, but I'm not going to minimize what he said or embellish what he said. But essentially what he said was, if I had a team, and that team, in spite of its story, history, and tradition, had a name that a significant number of people found offensive, I'd think about changing it. I don't know if you can put any more hypotheticals into one sentence than that. If I had a team, and if that team had a name, and if there were enough people who were offended by it, I'd think about changing the name. And I heard Native people, including Suzanne Harjo, who's one of the strongest opponents to that name, praised him. Oh, he took a position against the Washington football team. I said, did you hear the words he actually said? He said, if.
It was vague.
I think about it.
It's vague.
I mean, he could have come right out and said they should change the name.
He could have.
I mean, and it wouldn't have been absurd. It wouldn't have been an overreach. He didn't have to say, I'm forcing him to change the name. But when asked the question, he could have said, I think they should change the name. And I can appreciate that Native people view the R word in much the same way that black people view the N word. That would have been the most appropriate thing for him to say. But he couldn't bring himself to say it. And that is the problem with the news cycles. That is the problem with politicians. They're so concerned about their base. And I mean, when Kathy Hochul was asked about this mascot ban, she couldn't have run away from it any quicker. She said, no, that wasn't me. That was them. That was the education department. Even though she's trying to take over the state education department, she's saying, no, that was them. It wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. She could have said, I didn't have anything to do with that decision, but I do support their authority to do this, and I think they were right to do it. She could have said that. But did Kathy Hochul? Of course not. Of course she didn't. Why? I don't know. Maybe she thought she's still going to get some votes out of Massapequa or something like that. I have no idea what she was thinking. But I got news for you, lady. You ain't. You ain't getting them. Reg, I want to thank you again for standing in with me and giving me a little bit of feedback. I always appreciate it. And I want to tell you, folks, I'm grateful to you listening to this program. Support WBAI, support WPFW. And look forward. I'll be back here next week with Resistance Radio. I am John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. Yahweh.